This tutorial is going to cover Photoshop patterns. We're going to design a custom pattern and then explore using different tools to apply the pattern to an image. Okay, so I'm in Photoshop and I'm going to reset my Essentials workspace. This button here, my workspace button, and I can tell it to reset Essentials. Now I'm going to open a new document, File, New. This document is going to be 0.5 inches wide by 0.5 inches high with a 300 resolution and a transparent background. So I'm going to change pixels to inches. For width, I can type in 0.5. Height, also 0.5 inches. And we don't need the artboards box checked for this. I'm going to change the resolution to 300 pixels per inch. Background contents. I'm going to change it to transparent. Sometimes you can only see the first 3 options on that list, so if you scroll down a little bit, then you should be able to see transparent. All right, I think we're ready to create. I can zoom in a little bit. So we need to save this document. File, Save As. I'm going to tell this don't show again, and I'm going to tell it to save on my computer. I'm going to navigate into my Adobe Design Suite folder and make a new folder titled 18-PS-patterns. Open that folder. And we're going to save this document as a Photoshop PSD format. I'm going to highlight just where it says Untitled-1. I want to keep that file extension there. And I want you to type in your last name. -18 patterns 1.psd. So we'll have 2 documents for this lab. Hit save. Okay, so now I see the gray and white grid in the background. That's my transparency background. So nothing is there, it's empty space. We're going to go back to our custom shape tool, U on your keyboard, to create some shapes and use some colors, and we'll design our own pattern. So U on your keyboard, that brings me down to my shape tools, and then custom shape tool is at the very bottom of that list. Once I select the custom shape tool, I see the shape library open up in my options bar. I'm going to start picking out shapes from my shape library and create my own custom pattern. as I'm dragging it, I have Shift held down so that I keep my shape proportional. And if I keep my mouse key held down as well, I can use my space bar to reposition the shape as I go along here. And then I release my mouse first and then my keys. So you do need to be on a shape tool to be able to adjust the color of your shape. You'll notice at the top right here it shows my fill and stroke color of the shape. If I were to change tools, I don't see those options up there anymore. So you would want to be on your custom shape tool, and then you can adjust the colors. And then I'm going to start just layering on different shapes. So I'm going to choose a different shape. I can come over here and hold my Shift key down to create the size I want. I'm going to change the fill color. And then if I want to transform that shape at all, I can go to my Move tool and then Command or Control T to transform. If I hover over the corners, I can rotate it, I can flip it. If I wanted to change the stacking order, I would do that through my Layers panel. So I can see in my Layers panel here I have two different layers. Each time you add a new shape, it creates a new layer automatically. So my leaf right here is near the top of my Layers panel. If I drag that down underneath the heart shape through my Layers panel, that changes the stacking order, and now the heart is in the foreground. So that's how you can start to build your pattern. I can duplicate if I hold my Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC. I can click on a shape and I can duplicate it. Command or Control T to transform. And then you would want to apply that transformation. Make sure I'm on my custom shape tool. And I think I'll add one more shape. Now let's say I wanted to transform all of these shapes together now. What I could do is go to my Move tool, and I could hold my Shift key down to select all the layers and do a Command or Control T to transform. And I can resize it all together. Apply the transformation. You can always hit the eyeballs on those layers too to help you differentiate which ones they are. I know I used the same shape for a couple of different shapes in here. Okay, so we're ready to save our pattern. So first off, let's just save our document, File, Save. And to create a pattern out of these various shapes we put together, we need to define the pattern. So to do that, we're going to go up to the Edit menu, define pattern. And you can name it, otherwise it automatically puts in the name of the document. Hit OK. And now we're ready to close this document and move on to part 2. Lab 18 Photoshop patterns. So we did part 1. We created the custom pattern. Now part 2, we're going to apply the pattern using various tools. There is a file to download. Okay, I'll download this file and open it up in Photoshop. It's a JPEG right now, so it's going to be a flattened document with no layers. But we'll be saving it as a PSD, so we'll be able to create multiple layers in the document. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is save this file, save as. And I'll navigate into my USB drive, into my Adobe Design Suite folder. We already made a folder 18 Photoshop patterns, so I'm going to open up that folder. So right now my document is still a JPEG. I'm going to change that to a PSD. So go down to the file format. I'm going to change to Photoshop PSD. Now I can see the first document that we created in this tutorial, Patterns 1. I'm going to steal that name. So I'm just going to click it once. You don't want to double click it. And I'm going to change it from saying Patterns 1 to Patterns 2.psd. So now they have different names, and it won't override the other file. So I can hit save. Okay, so the first tool that we're going to use to apply our pattern is the paint bucket tool. So in my layers panel, I'm going to just kind of scooch this up a little bit here, just so I have some more room for my layers panel. I'm going to go down to the bottom. I can hit the add new layer, create layer, new layer icon down there, or I can go to the hamburger menu and choose new layer. I'm going to rename this layer from layer 1 to paint bucket. Okay. So our paint bucket tool, G on your computer keyboard, will get you to that set of tools. It's also near the gradient tool, so you might need to click and hold to expand your tools and choose paint bucket tool. All right, so at the top in our options bar, we choose what do we want the paint bucket tool to use to apply this color or pattern. So right now up here it says foreground, so it would apply white to wherever I told it. But I'm going to change that from foreground to pattern. And once you do that, you'll see your pattern library show up right next to it. So I'm going to click that open. And whenever you save a new pattern to the pattern library, they always put it all the way at the very bottom. So I can see there's my pattern. Nope, there's my pattern that I made. Okay, so I selected it. I'm just going to click outside so that menu closes. Maybe zoom in a little bit here. And we also need to select the contiguous box. So that means it's only going to apply this pattern to pixels that are touching each other or adjacent to each other. And since we're on an empty layer right now, we want this all layers box checked as well, so that what the paint bucket does, it determines that area that you're trying to apply the color to, and it will try to keep that pattern into that specified area. So we're going to apply this paint bucket pattern to the striped blue area under the large face in the image. So that would be this area right here. Now my tolerance right now is set to 34, so that's helping me determine what my color range is in relation to where the paint bucket's going to apply the pattern. So I'm going to stay in the blue area. I can click once, and you can see it kind of puts that pattern in similarly colored areas, only in it touching adjacent pixels, and it still is keeping that pattern going. So if I click over here, I don't really have a lot of say in where the pattern is being placed. It's just using the existing colors to determine the placement. And I can kind of keep clicking areas a little bit to make it come in a little bit stronger. Different shades of the blue will also bring it out a little bit more. So that looks like it's about it that I'm going to get out of this one here. So let's save it. Now we're going to make another new layer. So hit the Create New Layer icon at the bottom of your Layers panel. Double click where it says Layer 1, and we'll change the name of that layer to Pattern Stamp Tool. S on our keyboard will take us to our stamp tools. So I can see my clone stamp tools in the foreground right now. I need to hold that down and select the pattern stamp tool. So hence its name, the pattern stamp tool already knows that you want to apply a pattern. So I see that pattern library show up at the options bar, and I can open that up and I'll select my pattern that I created. And for this one, we're going to paint over the crown area on the larger head with our pattern stamp tool. And then we're going to change the blending mode of that layer. Okay, so you can also experiment with using the aligned box checked or not. I'll start with it checked. Now the pattern stamp tool uses a brush. So use that left and right bracket keys to adjust the size of the brush. And I can just start going in, and I'm going to paint on that pattern. So I am telling it where I want that pattern applied, but because I have that aligned checkbox up there, it's still keeping that pattern going consistent. If I kind of go over the face here a little bit, you can see there's the pattern perfectly in a grid. Now, because we're working on a separate layer, this is a non-destructive way to apply this pattern. So I purposely just went over the edges. I could always do an undo, but because it's on its own layer, we can also use our eraser tool. E will take you to your eraser tool, and then I can erase areas that I don't want the pattern applied to. So that's what makes this non-destructive. Now, if I uncheck, well, I need to go back to my pattern stamp tool. And this time, if I uncheck the aligned box, and I scooch down here a little bit, and I start applying my pattern, okay, there's one. If I release my mouse and start again at a different spot, it will reset where that pattern is being applied. Okay, so it doesn't keep that perfect grid. You can kind of layer the patterns on top of each other. Now on the right side, I'll go back up and I'll check the aligned box, and I'll keep the patterns aligned on this side. So I'm painting it in, and if I release my mouse and click back in to start up again, it doesn't reset the pattern grid placement. It keeps that pattern consistent. Okay, so what we can also do, because we put this on its own individual layer, is we can adjust things like the opacity. So I can bring my opacity down, make it a little more transparent, and I can also play around with my blending modes. So I have my pattern stamp layer selected, and I'm going to go to the box that says normal. And I can click that, and you can start to, if I just hover over the different blending modes, you can see it gives me a preview of what that will look like. So this is adjusting how that pattern is blending with the underlying layers. So it is detecting the highlights and the shadows and the different tones of colors in there, and you can choose whichever one you'd like. And it's a non-destructive blend mode, so I can always go back and I can change it back to normal if I want to take that off. Save your document. And the next tool we're going to use is the healing brush tool. So we'll create another new layer. I'm going to double click where it says layer 1, and we'll name this one healing brush. J on our keyboard will take us to our healing brush tool. Healing brush tool. Okay, so you want to make sure that your source for your healing brush is not set to sampled, but to pattern. And when it's set to pattern, that's when you'll see your pattern library visible. So I'm going to select my pattern that I created, and we're going to apply this to this box, rectangle box behind the smaller statue in the foreground. Okay, so I can have my aligned box checked. And again, this uses a brush size, so left and right bracket keys to adjust the size. And the healing brush tool automatically is going to blend your pattern in with the underlying layers. So I can see right now it is blending with the different color tones. So I'm choosing where I want the pattern applied, but since I have that aligned box checked, it's not changing the grid spacing at all. It's keeping that consistent. And I could change the blending mode of this layer as well. So it's kind of a blend on top of a blend. Save your document. Our next technique is going to be the pattern overlay layer. So what we'll do with this section, we'll use our quick selection tool to select the body of the large statue in the image. We're going to copy and paste it to put it on its own layer. So W will take you to your quick selection tool, and I need to go back to my background layer so it knows what I'm trying to select. Otherwise it would just want to select the healing brush pattern that I had put in that previous layer. So I'm on my quick selection, I'm on the background layer. I can bring my brush size up a little bit, and I'm going to select the body of this statue in the foreground. And that's okay, I can always deselect that area by holding down Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac, and I can run it over the areas that I want to subtract from the selection. Zooming in will also help. I see what's going on here. I could also uncheck this sample all layers box, because what it's doing right now is it's sampling portions of my pattern. So when I uncheck sample all layers, it's targeted just to that background layer. There we go. Now it's snapping in a little bit easier. I can subtract that area, and I need to fix the leg here a little bit. Now if you want to really get in there on the details, I would suggest zooming in and adjusting your brush size. Try and get this space between the arms and the body there. So there's my selection. I'm going to go back to my Move tool, and I'm going to copy my selection. So Edit, Copy, and I can also go back up to Edit, Paste Special, Paste in Place. So that ensures that my selection will be pasted exactly in the same spot that it previously was. And it did also create a new layer, layer 1. So I can rename it statue. And we're going to apply a pattern overlay to this layer. So if I hit the background layer, it's a little scary looking right now, but that's what's left. I can hide these other pattern painting layers that we created for a second. We're just dealing with that front statue layer right now. So I'm going to go into my Layer Styles dialog box by double-clicking the statue layer in the solid gray area in the Layers panel. That opens up my Layer Style box. Make sure you have your preview box selected. And locate Pattern Overlay. I'm going to check the box next to Pattern Overlay, but I'm also going to select the words Pattern Overlay to bring me to those corresponding options. So the first thing I'm going to do is change it to my pattern. And I can see right now it has a luminosity blend mode on it. I could bring that back up to normal. And I could bring my opacity back up to 100%. So now it's a completely solid pattern. No transparency on it at all. The difference with using pattern overlay in the layer style dialog box is that you can scale it. So on that scale slider, I could make the pattern very small but cover that whole area, or I could increase the size of that pattern. The other nice thing is that while I'm in this layer style dialog box, I can use my cursor to click inside the image and reposition it to exactly where I want it placed. And it's only clipping that pattern inside that layer. So now I could change my blend modes again. I think I'll do an overlay and then maybe bring my opacity down a little bit. I can hit OK. And now I see those layer style effects appear on the statue layer sublayers there. So let's save it. The last technique that we're going to use for this tutorial is the fill layer command. So we're going to create a new layer. This one we can keep it empty. I'll go down to the bottom of my layers panel, hit create new layer. I'm going to double click that layer and we'll name it fill layer. Okay, so we created the new layer. Now we need to make a selection of the blue sky behind the large statue. So I'm going to do my magic wand tool. W will take you to that set of tools, but because we were using our quick selection tool last, you might need to hold that down and grab your magic wand tool. So the magic wand tool makes a selection based off of color similarities. So this is pretty consistently blue up here. If I just click once in that area, it did a pretty good job of selecting that blue. I do have my contiguous box checked, so I see that this one little triangle of blue there didn't get added in. I can hold my shift key down. Now you'll see a little plus sign next to your magic wand tool. I can click that to add it to the selection. Now if I keep that selection open and active, I can go up to the edit command at the top menu bar, fill. So we want to change the contents to pattern, and then you're going to select your pattern. And to get different pattern styles, we can turn on this script checkbox here. And then you'll see you have a menu that shows up. We could do brick fill, crossweave along a path, random fill, spiral, symmetry. So it's different ways to apply that pattern grid formation. My favorite is spiral. Spiral and random is fun too, but I'll choose spiral and hit OK. And there's a lot of fun options in here. So I'm just going to start at the top slider. This is the pattern scale. So you can see if I enlarge that scale to the right, it enlarges that pattern. If I go down to the left, I can see more of the pattern, more spirals in there. Keep it about there for now. Ring spacing, that's going to be the space between those spiraled lines. And then pattern spacing is going to be the space in between those individual pattern shapes. It's kind of fun. So you can really get some interesting customized pattern spirals in there. And then color randomness. I'm going to bring both these sliders down to start off with here. So this is how my original pattern was colored. Color randomness is just going to randomly change the colors, just like the name implies. So the greater you change that slider to the right, the more color variation you're going to start to see. And then brightness, randomness also changes the tones of those random colors in there. Now this is more of a destructive way of applying the pattern, but because we put it on its own layer, we could always go back and we could delete it. We could maybe erase areas or just do it over again. But once I hit OK on this dialog box here, I won't technically be able to go right back in and adjust. I would need to probably just make a new layer and try it again. So I'll hit OK, and there's my pattern spiral applied up in the sky there. So that's going to be all for this patterns lab. We started off by creating our own custom shape pattern, saved that document, opened up this image file, and then applied the pattern using a healing brush, pattern stamp tool, paint bucket tool. We used the fill layer technique, and then we also applied the pattern overlay layer style effect. So I can deselect this, and we're going to save the document, and we're going to close the document. I'm going to open up Finder if you're on a Mac, or my document folder on a PC here, File Explorer. I'm going to navigate into my USB drive, into my Adobe Design Suite folder, and I'm going to open up folder 18, Photoshop Patterns. So you should have two documents in there, two Photoshop PSD documents named Pattern 1 and Pattern 2. So these are going to be the two documents you're going to submit to Canvas. So I'm going to select both of those. If you're on a Mac, you're going to zip these files the same way that we used to do in class. If you're on a PC, I can right click on those two files there. I'm going to go down to Send To, and then you'll see Compressed Zipped Folder. So it's doing the same thing that we would do on the Mac. It just takes a slightly different route to get there. So it renamed mine pretty much the same as what I had the document named already. Last name -18 patterns.zip. So I'm going to hit enter to apply that, and then that zipped file is what you're going to submit to Canvas today. So if you are going to submit this file for my class, you're going to go back into Lab 18 in Canvas, Photoshop Patterns, and submit the zipped file. And that will have both the PSD files compressed inside of it. And that is Photoshop Patterns. Thank you.